Margaret Hayes had always been the quiet type. She wasn't the woman who threw big parties or traveled around the world. No, she was the one who fed stray cats in the alley, brought warm tarts to the local bake sale, and kept her garden perfectly neat. Even after her husband passed away 5 years earlier, her little 2-bedroom cottage sat on the edge of town, filled with books, photo frames, and memories that whispered louder than any visitors ever did. She didn't mind the quiet. Not until that one cold October morning. That day, something felt different. She sat at her kitchen table, just staring at the empty chair across from her. It had been empty for years, but for some reason, it felt heavier that morning, like it was waiting for someone who would never return. She pushed her plate away, sighed, and grabbed her coat. No plan, no destination, just her keys, and a weight in her heart. That's how she ended up at Thessaly Orphanage. She hadn't been there in years, not since she volunteered during a Christmas event long ago. But that morning, her feet seemed to take her there on their own. She walked through the gates, and immediately, the noise of children playing, crying babies, and volunteers hustling filled the air. Then she saw him, a baby boy, sitting silently in a bassinet near the window. His back was straight, his tiny hands folded. His big, wide eyes stared out the window, not blinking, not crying, just watching, like he was waiting for something. His hoodie was too big, worn out, bright red. His skin was smooth and deep brown, so beautiful it looked like it belonged on a painting. But that wasn't what stopped Margaret in her tracks. It was his eyes, icy blue, clear like glass. Margaret slowly stepped closer. She bent down to see him better. Around his tiny wrist was a handmade bracelet, cloth buttons, and 2 faded letters stitched in. Ka. "What's his name?" Margaret asked one of the staff. "No name on record," the young woman replied. "He was left here 2 weeks ago. No note, no ID. Probably another border case. Happens more than we'd like." "Has anyone considered adoption?" Margaret asked softly. The woman shook her head. "He doesn't have papers. No birth certificate. System's still figuring it out." Margaret turned back to the boy. He hadn't looked away. His blue eyes stared right into hers. He wasn't crying. He wasn't afraid. He was just waiting. "I'll take him," she whispered. The next few months weren't easy. Paperwork, court filings, visits, interviews. Margaret was nearly 70. People asked if she could handle a baby, if she had enough money, if she had enough energy. But she never wavered. Not for a second. She named him Cairo, after the city where her late husband once promised they'd visit together. When Cairo finally came home, Margaret held him to her chest and felt something shift deep inside her. A stillness, a warmth, like her soul had found what it had been missing. Cairo grew fast. He didn't cry much, rarely got sick, and by his first birthday, he was already mimicking sounds. By age 2, he was repeating songs after hearing them once. By 5, he had memorized entire maps. He fixed Margaret's broken toaster when he was 7. No one knew how he did it. There was something special about him, something Margaret couldn't explain. But she never questioned it. She simply loved him more each day. But Cairo had secrets too. Sometimes at night, Margaret would hear him whispering in his sleep. Words she didn't recognize. Rhythmic, soft, and smooth like a song. It wasn't English. It wasn't gibberish either. It was ancient, like a language forgotten by time. One night, he kept saying the same phrase over and over. Kafaro AMA. Kafaro AMA. Margaret recorded it and took it to a local language professor. The man was stunned. He said the phrase resembled an old dialect spoken by a small African coastal tribe, one thought to be nearly extinct. When Margaret asked Cairo about it, he simply shrugged. "I don't know how I know," he said quietly. It's just in me. She didn't push. She just hugged him tighter. When Cairo turned 10, he started asking real questions. Where do I come from? Why are my eyes different? What does my bracelet mean? Margaret told him everything she knew, even though it wasn't much. She showed him the old bracelet. The 2 letters, Ka. She promised him that if he ever wanted to search for answers, she'd be right there beside him. But Cairo didn't go looking for answers immediately. Instead, he studied. He dove into books about African political history, coding, identity encryption. Things most kids couldn't even pronounce. By 17, he was building cybersecurity tools for non-profit groups. He never let go of the bracelet. He wore it like armor. And then one winter, he found something. He was going through old immigration files online. A seal on one file caught his eye. Barely visible, but there. A tiny symbol from a page dated 2002. He zoomed in, then froze. It was the same symbol etched into the bead of his bracelet. Cairo's hand shook. He followed the symbol, traced it back. It belonged to an old, shut-down organization called the Kadura Initiative, a secret program once tied to a political figure in a West African country called Vantera. That man's name was Kamari Ayatu, a leader who was exiled after a failed coup and presumed dead. But before his fall, Kamari had an infant son, a son who vanished during the chaos, a son no one ever found. Cairo ran a facial recognition scan. He uploaded a picture of Kamari Ayatu next to one of himself as a child. 92% genetic match. Cairo pushed back from the screen, his bracelet feeling heavier than ever. All this time, he wasn't just adopted. He was born into something powerful, dangerous. His mind raced. Who left him at the orphanage? Why? Was someone trying to protect him or hide him? That night at dinner, Margaret noticed Cairo was unusually quiet. He kept pushing food around his plate. Are you okay, love? She asked. He looked up. I found something, he said. Something big. Margaret set down her fork. Her heart pounded. How big? Cairo held up his bracelet. This isn't just from my past, he whispered. It's the key. She didn't know exactly what he meant, but she knew something had changed. Her boy, the curious one with the silent stare and clever hands, was standing on the edge of something huge, something life-changing. That night, Cairo didn't sleep. He stayed up researching, digging, and decoding. Everything pointed to one truth. His life had been a secret. He wasn't just a boy in a red hoodie from a bassinet in an orphanage. He was the hidden son of a man who once ruled and fell. The next morning, Cairo booked a meeting with an international records investigator. He told Margaret everything. She listened. She didn't try to stop him. She just nodded and said, I'll come with you. They flew to Geneva. At a secure archive center, a specialist scanned the bead of Cairo's bracelet. Beneath the plastic, inside the core, was a microchip, encrypted, locked tight. Can you crack it? Cairo asked. The expert smiled. Most people couldn't. He paused. But you? You wrote half the tools we're using. 2 hours later, the encryption broke. And what they found inside would change everything Cairo ever believed about himself. The screen flickered, then opened. Cairo leaned forward. His breath caught as rows of files filled the screen. Old records, encrypted logs, photos, letters, and one video labeled simply, For my son. The tech expert stepped back. It's yours now. Cairo clicked the video. It was grainy, dark, and silent at first. Then a voice, a deep, commanding voice, filled with strength but edged in sorrow. A man appeared on the screen, dark suit, proud eyes, standing in front of a plain white wall. He held a baby in his arms. The baby had a red hoodie and blue eyes. If you're watching this, the man said, Then the Kadura initiative has failed. They will say I was corrupt. They will say I was dangerous. But I was trying to save my country from greed, from violence, from those who only take. He looked down at the baby and held him closer. This child, my son, will never know me. But he is my legacy. He is the light that will survive the darkness. The screen went black. Cairo sat there, frozen. His heart pounded. That man, Kamari Ayatu, was his father. And he hadn't been abandoned. He had been protected. Inside the files were more secrets. Birth records, evacuation plans, escape maps, hidden funds. Cairo's father had left behind everything he could, hidden away in international accounts. Not to escape, but to one day rebuild. To give his son the tools to do what he couldn't. The money was real. The plans were real. And the access? It all belonged to Cairo. Not by name, but by DNA. The accounts were tied to his fingerprint, his retinal scan, his very existence. The next few days were a blur. Cairo and Margaret sat in hotel rooms, poring through files and records. They uncovered documents proving Kamari's innocence in many of the crimes he had been accused of. They found photos of villages destroyed by war, letters written to UN officials, blueprints of schools and hospitals that were never built. Kamari hadn't run away to save himself. He had run to save his son. Margaret stayed by Cairo's side the entire time. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer advice. She just listened, and every now and then, she reached out to hold his hand, just like she did when he was a baby in her arms. One night, Cairo sat at the edge of his bed, his hands trembling. "I don't know what to do with this," he whispered. "It's too much." Margaret knelt beside him. "You were never too much for me." He looked at her. She smiled softly. "If your father trusted you with this, then maybe he believed you'd do better than he did. And I believe it too." Cairo didn't chase power. He didn't fly to Vantara and declare his name. He didn't take pictures for magazines or shake hands with presidents. He launched a small non-profit. Quiet. Anonymous. He named it Project Cairo. At first, it started with building water wells in small villages across Vantara. Then came schools. Then came mobile tech hubs where young people could learn to code, build, dream. The humanitarian funds left by Kamari Ayatu became the seeds that planted hope. Cairo never used his real identity. He remained the nameless benefactor. His face stayed hidden, his past protected. But the impact? It was everywhere. In 2 years, Project Cairo helped over 400,000 people. One day, Margaret was reading the local newspaper when she saw a headline. "Anonymous donor rebuilds abandoned hospital in Vantara." She looked up and smiled. "I know that donor," she whispered, sipping her tea. Cairo chuckled from across the porch. "You like the name, huh?" "I do," she said. "But you're still my boy, right?" Cairo walked over and sat beside her, resting his head on her shoulder like he did when he was little. Always. A few months later, Cairo was invited to speak at a United Nations Youth Summit. He was told he could remain anonymous. Just his voice, no video. The panel was about young global leaders making an impact without seeking fame. Cairo stood behind a frosted glass screen. He wore a plain gray suit. No jewelry. Not even the bracelet. He took a deep breath. "I was raised by someone who taught me that love doesn't ask where you come from to decide your worth," he said. "I was adopted. I was different. I was lost. But someone saw me not as a burden, but as a beginning." The room fell silent. Then applause. Backstage, a UN official approached him. "If you ever want to meet Vantara's new government," he said gently, "they'd welcome you. You could even run for office." Cairo smiled. "That's not why I came back." "Then why?" Cairo paused, looked out at the city lights. "I'm not a kingmaker. I'm a gardener," he said. I'm just here to plant something better. That night, he flew home. When he walked through the door, Margaret was in the living room knitting a tiny sweater for their neighbor's baby. She looked up and smiled. "You were amazing," she said. "I watched online." "You did?" She nodded. "Always." They sat by the fireplace with hot cocoa in hand. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Somewhere down the street, children laughed as they chased each other. And Cairo, now a man with a quiet power, closed his eyes. He wasn't lost anymore. He wasn't just the son of a fallen leader. He wasn't just a name on a forgotten bracelet. He was the boy raised by love, the man trusted with a legacy, the gardener who planted peace. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Tell someone, give it a like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Remember, some stories are loud, some are whispered, but every act of love leaves a mark that lasts forever. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep watching.